Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Solution Room, where we interview preeminent figures from our community who are activists, business people, and those who really challenge us to make polar shifts in our behaviour so that we can advance to where we desire to be. Everybody saw Black Panther this year, and there is a utopia where we desire to be, which we are nowhere near. What this show is about is identifying all of those people that are going to get us gradually closer to where we need to be, at least. So today, I'd like to welcome Esther Stanford-Xosei to the show, who's going to speak about the reparations movement, about the principles of the reparations movement, and the fact that many of us don't actually realize that it isn't just economic, in that the term reparations actually means repair, which is a holistic vision for where we need to take both Africans and Africa. Esther, welcome to the show.
Thank you, it's good to be here.
So, we can conclude that white supremacy defends white supremacy to the letter.
Absolutely, it's about power.
We know that nobody is going to capitulate by choice. And when all of those movements are joined, the attack becomes unparalleled. And that's where we are at with this movement from the US, because the race summit that everybody's forgotten about, that took place September 9th, 2001, was completely blown out of the water. Number one, you had Africans there talking about reparations with the United States, and you had Palestinians there talking about the misappropriated lands by settlers from Israel.
Yes.
Now, the United States walked out with Britain on the first day. And there was global uproar in that Israel had convened 67 UN mandates about illegal settlements. 2 days later, 9/11 happened.
That's right. Yeah.
There was no more race summit. The entire world was looking at terrorism, and the United States were the world's darling with blood on their hands. I remember that even the PLO leader at the time was donating blood on camera to send to the United States. And then within the next couple of days, there were tanks bombing Yasser Arafat's palace. And this was an old man. So, knowing the nature of a beast that will vehemently defend this position, not just with articulation, not just with propaganda, but will also act with agents to interfere with our lives, which quite possibly some of the movement have already experienced.
Most definitely.
I'm well aware. So the one point that I will come to now is that I'm aware from attending the march and my observations is that you cannot have a march from Brixton to Parliament Square, shut off all traffic, and there is no mention even in the London Metro. So what that told me immediately is that that was a security news blackout.
That's right.
And a security news blackout happens by going from government to MI5 directly to news agencies. Now, a lot of people wouldn't realise what a security government news blackout is or why they will put that in place, because it humiliates Great Britain internationally.
That's right.
So they shut it down. So speak to us a little bit about your experiences from dealing with the march over the period of time, and how you've seen the state intervene?
Well, the state has been intervening from the inception of the march, which began in 2014 under the leadership of the Rastafari Movement UK. And in 2015, it was decided, the Rastafari Movement UK chose not to march, and many people wanted to march. And it is out of that process that then the African Emancipation Day Reparations March Committee, that by the way has representatives who were involved in Rastafari Movement UK. So there was a continuation, there was a building on what had been started in 2014. So we're now in the 5th year. This march on the 1st of August, well, we say Messiah, because it is about reclaiming and us seizing back our power to define reality, not to live by someone else's reality. So we'll be marching for the 5th year. Now, the experiences around media, which is what I think I need to touch on first.
Definitely.
It's very noticeable about the absence of mainstream media. I mean, this is media, but we're talking about mainstream media, not just the
Not to cut
media.
you, but what I will always do is define and separate. Mainstream, I always talk about in caliber. So when we talk about European-owned media, let's just give them their label. They're European. This is European media.
Okay, sure. Thank you for that, and I take that, definitely that correction. So European media, which is what most people see as mainstream media, but of course, they are there every year. We know this because you can tell from the technology of the equipment, the cameras, the people who are at the front, they are taking pictures, they are filming, but yet it doesn't make it onto the news. And you've already explained the reasons why. And part of it is because something that many people may not be familiar with, and especially those who live in Europe and those who live in the UK or are here for any period of time, the movement in the UK
Powerful.
is, I would say, the most threatening movement globally.
Yeah.
And the reason why, and it's not just about us being born here, it's because this is the relics of empire, British Empire. So it means there are communities living within the United Kingdom that come from all over the world and all those countries that Britain has colonised. But we have settled here for whatever reason. Many came as economic migrants or what have you. Many have been fleeing persecution because they are still criminalised and tormented in their own home countries. So we have the movement in the UK has always been Pan-Africanist, Pan-Caribbean, internationalist, global. Yeah, it's been all of those four things. That's what makes us. And the visions, the ideas, the platforms, the programs, the strategies, the tactics are far more expansive than what you find with many of our movements, even the resistance that we're seeing in Africa, that a lot of the time gets localized in terms of country struggles, ethnic community struggles or nationality struggles, and so forth. The movement in the Caribbean is being framed as a Caribbean movement. In North America, one of the main reparations formulations, I mean, there are many other tendencies, but one of the most well-known ones is NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. But a lot of the movements, although there have been other tendencies that are quite global, they have kind of located or limited their organising, their strategizing to prioritising, if you like, where they live. And there are arguments and tendencies even within the International Social Movement for African Reparations and the contingent of us that are based here that will say, yeah, we should just focus on us here. It's not about our people anywhere else. Because they don't understand geopolitics.
Absolutely.
Okay? They don't understand that we are a global people and that we are scattered and we reside and we lay claim to, four corners of the earth. So we have this global nation in formation that is over 350 million strong. That is a power base.
Absolutely.
If we were to tap into that. And so the vision from the movement based in the UK, the I Smile based in the UK, is expansive because we're able to learn from the struggles, the successes, even the failures, because we like to talk a lot about success. We don't talk a lot about what went wrong.
What are the greatest lessons I learned?
What are the lessons that we can learn from Black Power movement at its height in the 60s and 70s? Other movements, okay? Because movements wane, they come and they go, they get resurrected, you know, they get renewed and regenerated.
But we've got to look at why they dissipate.
Exactly.
And we've also got to look at the influence of media through movies, music, and that transition of cultural values that always dissipates those movements when they're at a peak.
Right. So in relation to the messaging and the propaganda, the media around this march, the British establishment, the British state, the empire, because, you know, people talk about American empire, but where do all the presidents come? Where do they come? This is the motherland for them, for Europeans.
And the city of
in terms of global white supremacy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you said, the city of London,
coordinates
financial centre,
those economic ties.
That's right. Geopolitical economic ties.
So you touched on something very important, in that everybody wants to localise it, not realising that your boat stop isn't the problem.
Exactly.
To take the EU, it was never a cultural union. Italians, when they're putting their olive oil drizzle on pizza, look down on English people eating their £1 Iceland pizza.
And vice versa.
And vice versa. So it's not cultural. They are economic unions. And I think one of the things that's held us back is that for anybody else, you're not rediscovering America. But when it comes to us, we don't see that a purely economic union empowers all of us because it creates the trade, it creates the arguments based on your interests as opposed to arguments that can conflate the issue, as I've seen even you speaking in the past with fellow Africans who are speaking on the interests of Europeans, not realising that they're betraying their own interests and the possibility of actually striking at the heart of the beast and receiving any form of reparations, because as you said, it is a phase and tiered execution. So speak to me a little bit more about the 5-point plan.
Okay, well, the 5 principles of reparations,
absolutely.
Because let's not make an assumption that people who might be watching this, that they have the same understanding or knowledge around reparations or even ideas. So essentially, in the movement, we use 2 definitions for reparations. We talk about a conceptual definition, which is the framework, the big picture stuff. We refer to what is known as the Chinwezu. Professor Chinwezu, Nigerian public intellectual, who's produced so much knowledge and consciousness about our story as African people. So his definition, and I'll paraphrase it, is basically that reparations is about repair, but holistic repairs. In every field of people activity, every field of our human endeavour, economic, social, political, cultural, educational, technological, interpersonal repair, self-repair, repairs in the way that we see ourselves, repairs in how we relate to each other, and also how we relate to our environment and other peoples of the planet Earth. So that's the conceptual definition. And one of the things that Chinwezu says is that more important than any monies to be received and any lands to be recovered is the opportunity that the reparations campaign offers for the rehabilitation of Black people, he says, by Black people, for Black people. Opportunities for the rehabilitation of our minds, our mindsets, our material conditions, our family traditions, our spiritual traditions, but first and foremost for the rehabilitation of our minds.
Which is the part that can be delivered by us.
That's right.
Now, I see that Europeans do grasp that bit a little more, because they'll be convinced by that, not so much by the land being returned, not so much from economic reparations, but they like that part.
Right.
However, they like it with their mouths, because everything with their actual action resists it, including any of our attempts to create schools within the UK based on their money, which is our taxation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the second definition around the five, you was asking about the five principles, is under UN, United Nations international law. Okay? Now, this is not the UN, because a lot of people don't, when you mention UN, they just think someone's white, normally, sitting up there and making up these things. No. These UN principles on a right to a remedy and reparations were forged as a result of people's struggles. People's struggles to transform self, community, and nation. And therefore, you kind of create the avenues within what is considered law, international law, by convention, and by what people who are in positions of power say, these are the minimum standards that we must govern ourselves by, as if you like, right-thinking individuals and peoples and nations. So under the UN principles, which was codified in 2005, they refer to restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. And I'll just say a bit more about all of those. Now, in the African struggle, people of African heritage, whether people self-define as African or not, okay? We're talking about peoples who can claim that origin to our homeland, our motherland, Africa. No matter who we have become or how we self-define now.
Absolutely.
All right? And the restitution being the first principle around that is really, I guess it speaks to all the measures that you put in place to kind of put a people or a group back in a position they would have been in but for. But for. And there's a whole list of the but-fors. So we use the term Maangamizi in the movement, Kiswahili term, African Holocaust, and it refers to a multitude of violations of our rights, crimes, sins, injuries against the person, family, community, nation, environment, our ecosystem, okay? So common words that get used are enslavement, colonialism, neo-colonialism, genocide, terrorism, racism, Afrophobic racism.
Absolutely.
Because we can't just talk about racism. We have to recognise Afrophobia as a specific
we're very
form.
Unique people with a very unique experience.
And Afrophobia as the specific form of anti-black racism. Because there is a notion that there are some communities who define as black but are not self-defining as African.
Yes,
so, for instance, Aboriginal peoples of Australia, many of them they call themselves black. The men, anyway, say black fellas. They're black fellas, and they identify with our people's struggle as well. But they're also asserting an Aboriginal identity. Yeah. And there are many also people who are African or of African heritage who are also asserting an Aboriginal or a Moorish or an indigenous identity as well. So it's very complex.
Which is part of the challenge.
Yes.
And I find any time that I use African, people will refer to Afrikaners.
Yes.
But because it is a common identifier that we all recognise, you must start somewhere.
Absolutely, and I think the debate is still going on the origins of that term, and I'm not really going to go into that history, because my argument to that, absolutely, my argument to that is that as long as there is a place on this earth that many people identify as Africa, geopolitically, we are connecting ourselves to that land.
Yes.
And the right not only to belong, but to benefit from the resources of our homeland. Because right now they are being misappropriated to benefit other nations and to further wars of terror and destabilisation, especially in this era of Brexit. So going back to the 5 points, okay, restitution putting us back in a position we would have been in. So imagine if the Maangamizi never occurred. Who would we be if we had all of our people, all of our skilled people, all of our artisans, our technologists, our scientists, our healers, our educators,
and no
our
colonial
griots?
education
No,
system.
exactly. Who would we be if we had effectively decolonised and this never happened? Because even in our weakest state, we still manifest that brilliance. Even in our weakest state,
Absolutely.
even with our dispossession, we're still brilliant. So imagine who we would have been. So that's the restitution. It's very concrete. It's about a right to citizenship, for instance, a global African citizenship, a right to belong to not just the continent, but for some people it's about specific countries or communities and so forth. But the key goal around restitution is about restoring our homeland. Okay? So many people look at the so-called Jewish experience.
Actually, well, we can define them as they define themselves, which are Ashkenazi Jews, who are converts after the 10th century, who did not genetically originate from the land that is Israel, which was Palestine, apparently a non-state place, which would have been Uganda.
That's right. So many people talk about the compensation that that group of people continue to receive.
Absolutely.
Actually, the whole claims process has been over 60 years.
And from the United States, they receive $3 billion. To put it into context, that is for their military-industrial complex.
That's right.
And not only that, $3 billion is also the number of global combined monies that come from the United States for every other nation in aid. However, the rest of that aid is offsettable against resources and terms and conditions for engagement, including providing out-of-date drugs to African nations, where that money goes back to the big pharma in the United States. And then off the back of that, you see, not to cut you, there is something that happens which is a sleight of hand. We give aid. Now, we would think that is direct cash.
Who's the we?
The we who aren't aware. So I'm not so educated. So I'm going to extrapolate you from that.
All right,
But I don't have a degree. I'm not the most educated man in the world. And I don't have a particularly sophisticated understanding. So there are many who believe that that aid that is given is in cash, not necessarily knowing that there are preferred contractors chosen by those giving aid, who are the actual recipients of the money, whether or not they deliver what they're contracted to deliver. Now, the debt lies with the so-called beneficiary who may or may not have benefited.
Most of the times they don't.
They don't. And this is the point that I'm making. So then the argument comes back. Year upon year, we give aid to Africa, and Africa wastes it, steals it. So they'll take some nation who have a high level of fraud, when everybody knows that all politicians globally take bribes and are bent, some in a more sophisticated manner, some who take less in terms of their stake from the table. However, many don't know the nature of the IMF aid and the fact that these contractors, who are also cronies, and giving paybacks to those who release the funds.
Well, just on that point, but why I mentioned the Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish issue is that many people just talk about the compensation, but they don't actually see that the first act of their reparations was establishing a nation state of Israel, called Israel.
That is militarily protected.
And all the money then goes towards bolstering that state. So let us just put that into context
to make it more
in terms of our situation. So when I spoke about restitution, and I was talking about restoring a homeland. is the key strategic goal. But just on that point you've mentioned, because it's very relevant about the aid, many people may not know, but there are two reports that I want to refer people to. One was produced by War on Want, called Britain's New Colonialism, and it points out that 101 companies registered on the London Stock Exchange control over $1 trillion, and these are conservative figures, okay?
Absolutely.
Of Africa's key commodities and mineral resources: gold, copper, diamonds, cobalt, the whole range. So, and this is in 37 countries south of the Sahara. So this extraction of resources, and when we look at the richness of our continent, it is not benefiting African people.
Absolutely.
It is still benefiting the same colonizers. And now there's not just Europeans, there are other colonizers too. So it's very important, that point you made, and that, I think, should kind of make people question this notion about aid and what is being given. Now there's another report.
Because we start to actually repeat that rhetoric.
That's it.
In opposing each other.
So Britain's New Colonialism, the scramble for Africa's resources, War on Want, was produced in 2016. There's another report called Honest Accounts. There was a 2014 version and a 2017 version. Produced by many organisations such as Jubilee Debt Campaign and many, many others, trade justice movements and so forth. But what that report, again, these are conservative figures, yeah? Because many of the researchers are European.
Absolutely.
Okay? Who are doing this research. And some of them are challenging their government and so forth, but I'm just saying they're conservative figures. But those reports have shown that Africa, as a continent, is a net creditor to the whole world to the tune of 146.
Africa is a benefits system
exactly.
to the entire planet.
Exactly. 146 million every year. Now, that's just 1 year. So a net creditor, meaning not all this aid stuff, forget it. Because whatever might be given, as you said, it's being extracted with the other hand. But Africa is actually still benefiting, a net creditor, the rest of the globe. And the figures, so you add that up, that's just 1 year. Yeah. Add that up over 500 years. Add it up. So we're talking about an astronomical, if we're going to measure it in money terms, an astronomical. In fact, we're still accounting for those who are into all the, the financial stuff, which I'm not a financial expert, but I do know a little bit about accounting. We're still accounting. We're still adding up what has been the damage in the past, but in the present. And legally, because my background is law, is we start from the here and now, the today. And then we trace it back to the historic wrongdoing and injustices. Inflation. That's just point one, restitution. Compensation, which is what most people think reparations mean. They make reparations synonymous with compensation. It is not. The term reparations comes from reparate, to repair, to restore. And in fact, in the English dictionary, Collins English Dictionary, one of the original meanings or explanations that was given to that term was that it must result in the transformation of a people or a group affected by injustice. Okay? So just throwing money at a problem people doesn't do it if you don't have your strategy, you don't have your plan, you don't have your economy, you don't have your systems to be able to extract those resources to go into the development of your people.
They'd go right back.
Absolutely. Key thing. So compensation. But compensation, by the way, is not just about money. It's about a financial price or an economic value, which I prefer to use that term. Economic value to injustice, crimes against humanity, war crimes, racism, if we just keep it simple.
Yep.
Okay? So most people who are employed, people of African heritage anyway, have had some form of discrimination at work.
Absolutely.
They might not see it as discrimination, they might not challenge it as racial discrimination, but they will observe that they are more brilliant than their co-worker, or they've been there longer, or they work harder, but they're not getting the promotion, they don't get the matching salary. There's a cost, isn't
Absolutely.
there? We can actually measure the cost of that gap between what they should be getting and what they're actually getting. Let's just talk about what's going on around mental health, because there's a lot of mental health, ill health in our community, a lot of trauma that we're still trying to recover from. And it's continuing, because remember, you can't fully repair the harm if you don't stop the harm.
But that is also about cognitive dissonance,
Absolutely.
where there was a belief in the system where people thought they were stakeholders, and then they get to that stage where they realise they're not, and they don't have anything, and that machine breaks down.
Yeah, yeah.
And we see it more and more every day. But the worst part is, it's actually affecting people who are younger and younger.
Yeah.
That's our challenge.
So we can also cost that. What would it cost to have culturally competent, African-centred mental health services, provisions, our experts, our psychologists, our psychiatrists, our holistic healers, spiritual? What is the cost of that?
And we have
in terms of the system. You're right, we do have them.
I know, because I've recently been collecting and collating
absolutely.
African therapists for the reasons that in the Grenfell site I was putting together a program for young entrepreneurs, but then started to collect the therapists for this reason. Why? Because now, anytime you go into the NHS for that therapy, you get a permanent record. And my desire was for us to treat our young people without them going on record.
Exactly. Brilliant. And that is a reparatory endeavour, okay? So it's about the cost of that. So compensation, that all it is about compensation. It's also about the value, say, of lands, resources, minerals, our waters, fishing industry, period. So look at how banana and sugar industry have been devastated in the Caribbean. Look at the cost to the Caribbean region in terms of trade. Look at the conditionalities that get imposed in terms of economic partnership agreements that are forced on African, Caribbean and Pacific nations, whereby our people are sitting on mountains of food, but yet they're importing food. Then we're getting all these diseases of so-called affluence that our grandparents never had, but yet we're meant to be better off materially today. So all of that would come into compensation. The cost, the true cost of fair trade or trade justice. And you spoke about the importance and your work in relation to inter-African trade. Not just in terms of existing countries.
Of inter-African trade. And then incorporating other nations. Just like you saw with Haiti in terms of coming into the African Union. But that is the greater fear. Look, let's not pretend that we are in any ambiguity about the nature of the beast. We are at war without desiring to be at war. So we are perpetual victims with people who are perpetual aggressors, and we actually have no desire to fight, but to be left alone. So you're walking away from somebody who is punching you in the back continually. Now, we cannot pretend anymore that there isn't a formula for reparations. We've identified it. It was the establishment of the state, but of Israel. But why was that? The determining factor was based on the loans that were given to Great Britain for the First World War, and then a condition of the loans that put them over the advantage of Germany in the Second World War in establishing a state. So that was based on a contractual, and at this time they had no military might whatsoever. They relied 100% on the British state. And when we talk about terrorism, and Israel will talk about terrorists, what people may not be aware in the establishment of the state of Israel was that Israel was actually established from terror. Great Britain established Israel for the Ashkenazi Jewish people who'd converted, and the King David Hotel was their base. Now, because the British weren't establishing far enough, quick enough, those initial leaders, including the first Prime Minister, blew up the King David Hotel, murdered British generals, well-known, documented historical fact that we don't speak about, because he who pays the piper calls the tune.
That's right.
And then when you look at the source of news evidence, which is why similarly we have to establish our media outlets, grow them and promote them, because they're cultural outlets.
Absolutely.
So we have to talk
machine
about what established that state. So part of it was the cultural banking of Ashkenazi Jews. But what we did when we came to this country was abandon our cultural banking practices.
Yes.
The partner gave us power outside of any banking system. Everybody has one. Sawalha, Susu, whatever you choose to call it. We all have these systems. It's just cultural banking.
Yeah.
But because of the unique nature of our kidnap, of our dehumanization, our lack of values for ourselves, we find ourselves approval junkies.
Yes.
So the first thing is that we need to fit in. Immediately, the British banking system saw that we were worth money. They offered us bank accounts and interest-based mortgages, which is when we stopped getting properties with the veracity that we did through cultural banking, which was partners. So if you speak a little bit more on the cultural nature of what we need to do, because I don't think when we have these arguments, we speak about the reparatory nature of returning to our cultural source, our traditions, and the assets that are in the land that we're supposed to take advantage of.
So in order to answer that, I'll just finish on the last points of the 5 points. I mentioned restitution, I mentioned compensation, the next one's rehabilitation, which is a key part of it. Because when you're talking about cultural values and our base, the essence, because remember, culture permeates everything. It should permeate our, as you said, our economics, our finance, our banking systems, our economy, our supply and our exchange, and the various systems that we've developed, even barter systems, you know, in terms of traditional African economies that still exist. Our services, our education system must be infused with our cultural worldview, our cosmologies, our systems of how we exist as humans, but we interact with our environment, with the earth, the cosmos, you know, ultimately. All of that comes into it. So rehabilitation speaks to all of that. The establishment of psychotherapeutic intervention services, the kind of family building, because a key part of the damage is what's happened in our families. The divide of our men from our women, broken families, many families where, for instance, dad is not around, mums are struggling, and I'm not putting no judgment on you know, so-called single mothers, or I don't, you know, because there's always fathers around, but they might not physically be living in the home or in the lives of their children, and mothers also, you know, having to carry a lot of the burden. Now, when, for instance, women are criminalised, a lot of the time through crimes of poverty, so women who get involved with trafficking, for instance, of narcotics because of money, and they have children to feed. When that woman gets taken out of the house, what happens if there's no father there?
Absolutely.
Family is literally broken. So many of our children are in care homes. I don't even like to use the word care homes to describe them,
because
but that local authority care homes, and that is what's happening. So the rehabilitation is about the building, the cohesion, the rebuilding, re-establishment of right relations between the pillars of our society, our men and our women, our children, our elders together. Because we're also living in a society that elevates the youth above all other sections of the society.
Because they're more malleable.
Exactly. And we know that in terms of our people's ways, it is about the elderly too. It's about the ancestors, but it's also about the unborn. It's about the unborn. So we have to get back into, again, Chinwezi's definition, our mindset. Get back into our right mindset. Because we're trying to do good things, but we still haven't got rid of a colonizer's mindset. And there's a really great quote by Bell Hooks, African-American cultural critic. She said, to the slave, we have, actually, let me say it again. She says, we have a slave's idea of freedom.
Absolutely.
And to the slave, the master's way of life represents the ideal.
Absolutely.
And I think that it epitomizes many of our people. We have not only a slave master, but a colonial mindset and colonial ideas of freedom. And that's understandable, given what we've been through.
And no matter what we believe, we all, one and all, have some modicum of that mindset.
And we have
that's
to still,
our lens.
and that is, because we're a work in progress. We're not just born perfect and that's it for all time. We're constantly renewing, regenerating, improving ourselves on the basis of our understanding, our higher knowledge that we come into consciousness of, the more and more that we experience the university of life. That's rehabilitation. Satisfaction, the next one, very quickly, is about all the measures that we put in place to feel a level of satisfaction, that there has been some level of redress and repair. Now, let us be very clear. Some of the damage is irreparable. This is how dire it is. So I'm not going to pretty it up.
Genetic
there are some of our
states.
people who are beyond repair. Okay? And we have to deal with that because they're still our community members. But when people are programmed to work against self, family, community, nation, no society that wants to grow can accommodate or tolerate that. And those are some of the difficult things that we don't like talking about.
However, we must create an African codes of conduct that is in place to deal with that kind of excommunication.
Definitely.
Because everybody else has it.
That's right.
Which is how they remain functional.
That's right.
And when you have laws are absolutes, which is why I love them. Red means stop, amber means get ready, green means go. And when you have a flag, that red, that black and that green flag, it is based on laws which are absolute.
That's
and when you transgress laws, nobody is safe. And when those laws are observed, everybody is safe.
So that's a key part of the repair. Reinstituting our law, our morals, our codes of how we are going to govern ourselves. Internally, but also how we govern ourselves and how we project ourselves externally to the world. That's our satisfaction. Many people might understand it there are some other basic things I can mention. So, for instance, movements that are saying we should correct the curriculum. So we're talking about African-centered curriculum, but that means in every kind of field of knowledge and discipline. Law, science, technology, the whole range, food science, everything. It's totally holistic. It also includes removing the remnants of the genocidaires, the colonialists, the imperialists, the terrorists that are still existing in our homelands. So institutions of learning, so-called, named after people that slaughtered and massacred our people. Zimbabwe,
Rhodesia,
what people refer to as Victoria Falls. Why is it called Victoria Falls? It's got an indigenous name.
Absolutely.
Mosiatunya, the garden that thundered, the river that thunders, basically.
And their neighbours, Azania.
Exactly. So we've got, you can see it all over in the Caribbean. We've got a University of the West Indies. We're not West Indian, okay? So many of these remnants still exist. And we have the responsibility. So it's one thing to talk about what other nations who are not African Caribbean or other African diaspora groupings owe us. But what about when technically we have people in states in Africa and the Caribbean where even though we know that many of these states are still controlled, if we talk about the African Union, 70% of its funding comes from outside. Chinese, European Union and so forth. So it's not our African Union.
Francophone,
exactly.
No,
Caribbean, well,
same.
From the time you have Queen
Francophone.
Elizabeth II as head of state, and you have a Governor General that is sworn in by the Queen and it answers to Queen Elizabeth II, because there's more than one Queen, then you're in a problem. You don't have sovereignty. You really don't have independence.
But can we just speak on this very quickly?
Yeah,
because
sure.
every year we'll celebrate Trini independence, we'll celebrate Jamaican independence.
It's crazy,
and
isn't it?
There's a reason I want to bring that up.
Yeah.
It's just so that we have clarity.
Mm.
And I'm going to pay it forward first to Brexit. Because a lot of people don't know why the government will give the great unwashed the ability to actually vote out. And they think that this was brought up by the masses. Now, this isn't a revolutionary country, because Cromwell used soldiers to do the changeover, which didn't last. Now, Brexit was about leaving a Europe before the financial tsunami comes on board, and you're paying for a broke Italy, Spain, Portugal and Greece. And you're fighting Germany and France for biscuit crumbs in a Europe where there are no resources to steal. Now you have, on the other hand, when you flip that coin, the British Commonwealth, which does not revolve, where there are plenty of cupcakes, ginger cakes, and apples to steal, which are vast. And that is why.
And you've instilled yourself and your family as perpetual rulers for all time.
And what you do have there are generals who were educated at Sandhurst,
yes,
who see Africans through European eyes, which is why you can't be surprised when they're devastating their people physically in the genocides that are being committed today.
That's right.
So it's an easy win-win. So now, to take that back to when Jamaica got their independence, that was to get rid of British citizenship in Jamaica. So that now you're independent, you just can't come over. But you're no more independent than you were the day before.
That's right.
I don't think many of us have clarity
on that.
about that fact. When we're dancing every year at a Jamaican independence, Bajan independence,
wasting resources
or any other
that could go into development, services, education, healthcare, basic services, housing that our people need. Yeah? So you're absolutely right. And that is a key part of it, because what did we lose? We lost a power base. We've not ever regained sovereignty.
No.
We've not regained sovereignty over our homeland, our right to belong, and our right to have a say in how the resources, the huge resources, not only material, mineral, natural resources, ecological resources, how those resources should get used in the benefit and upliftment of our people, and also in our quest for further humanity and further human progress. So the independence question is key, because we are not independent.
And to give it its proper name, sovereign.
Yeah, sovereign. We are not sovereign. And what we have are these microstates that are basically, as Professor Chinweizu refers to them, Bantu stands.
Definitely.
Yeah? Where we have this ceremonial sense of we're important, we've got a flag, we've got an anthem. But as you mentioned about the training of armed forces, police, still being done by these same people. They're even selling us outdated military technology that they know doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Yeah? They know this.
So the attack is simple. When you're creating next generation stealth planes and selling analog air systems in Africa. In fact, this happened in 2003. British aerospace were attacked because the nation evades me. They sold them a civic and military analog aviation system for 27 million, when Eurospace had one for 7.5 million that was digital. Now, they had one of the reps from the company, and they asked, why did you sell them a military and civic system when they have no air force? Crickets. So when you deal with your adversary with no economic parity, you must understand that you're committing further genocide and suicide of your people. And the fact that intra-African trade, through technology, through creating processing plants and manufacturing plants within Africa, would negate Europeans' entire role, China's entire role within Africa, because everything is taken out to be processed and brought back.
You're absolutely right. So just speaking a bit further on the last point then, because that's when I spoke about satisfaction, you've actually, in terms of, you've mentioned some of the solutions that need to happen. We could classify that as satisfaction.
Absolutely.
Yeah? It is about ensuring that we do have the defence systems in place, military, economic, political, every kind of defence, community, self-defence that we need, because defence, as we know, and security, and our collective security happens at many different levels. You've got human security, you've got food security, you know, you've got economic security, so all of that comes into it.
Very important, food security.
Yes.
And one of the hugest food providers on the planet that has the worst famines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we grow particular foods to answer so-called monetary system debt, fiat monetary system debt.
And telling us what we should grow. And we're importing all this imports. I mean, I know there's a recent summit that's talking about how does the Caribbean, for instance, stop importing so much food, and most of this food is harmful, processed food, and which is going to have further health benefits. Sorry, not benefits, deficits. And detriments.
Diabetic and otherwise.
Yes, so, and that is a key thing around the public health crisis. Hypertension, diabetes, all the conditions that we have where there's not enough resource investment in terms of looking at the cure, the solutions, many of which some of are simple. You change diet, you change people's nutrition, you change the kind of way we relate to our environment, then we can eliminate many things. But I'm not going to go into that because that's someone else's portion. But the last one, the last of the 5 points, okay, guarantees of non-repetition. Now, for me, this is the most important strategic aspect of any people who desire to be liberated and truly free, and to sustain that freedom have to prioritize as part of their reparations struggle.
Absolutely.
It's what enabled the Ashkenazi Jews
never again
to say never again. You took
never again
right out of my mouth. Never again. And they mean it. And it will be never again. But many of us are not thinking on that level. We're not thinking that, as I mentioned, this is an intergenerational movement. Many of us have already been sacrificed. We've been tortured, we've been criminalised, we've been demonised for standing up for this very struggle that some of us have a bit more freedom of movement, depending on where we live, to articulate today. So it is also the case that as a people, we have to recognise that there will be casualties in this war.
Most definitely.
From among our own front ranks and our own troops.
But you see, now we're talking about there will be casualties from us.
That's
you see,
right.
we have been casualties in any case.
Absolutely.
So nothing really changes for us.
No, nothing really changes, but our people need to understand that. Because in our attempt to think we can move forward, there's a lot of genuine desire. You hear it. Unity, unity, unity.
Rhetoric.
But what we don't talk about is what keeps us divided. Ununited.
Yes.
What keeps us? And sometimes it is also because the casualties they grow into becoming a huge problem that we haven't built the capacity or the systems and the processes to deal with in equity and fairness according to our African ethics, such as Ma'at.
Yes.
Okay? Which is really key here.
The 42
because
laws.
we know what has been done to us. We know what is wrong. We know what we've been given. What is our knowledge? What is the alternative now? Which is really the best reparations that we can make for any past. abuses, violations, devastations, dispossessions, disempowerments, is to make preparations for the future.
Absolutely.
Reparatory justice is a process. It began before we were born. You mentioned Haiti. Look at Haiti today. But the first nation state, as we know, in the diaspora, and the principles around which Haiti was formed was about reparations, because that was about establishing a sovereign nation. And of course they were penalised for it, which why they're still suffering economically, politically and otherwise to this day.
Where a president was kidnapped within a sovereign state, which is true terrorism, based on genuine white supremacy, and only a Hollywood actor made any noise about it globally. So you state one of the most important things you brought in a factor, because one of the most important and overlooked components of us is our spirituality. And it just happens that my missus listens to those 42 laws of might every morning. That's how YouTube goes through and relax, and I'm not allowed to swear or talk about business or anything else in this tranquil time. So establishing our spiritual base is one of those most important elements. And because we are so much fixated on the economics, this doesn't come into play. So again, it's another show. It's just something for people to think about, because we are a holistic people without the holistic components to actually repair us. So you've been given a great insight. I'd like to thank Esther for coming down today into what the holistic repertory movement is, which is educational, it's spiritual, it's economic, it's in terms of our defense, where you in Israel, you do 2 years military servitude to gain your citizenship, so you know the cost. What cost are we prepared to have true African citizenship in a Wakanda-based utopia that there is no genuine African would deny they really desire to see? Thanks for joining us in The Solution.